Hello, Joan McCarter. How are you?
Hi, Conn. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. We are taping on Wednesday. This is another edition of Pros and Conn here at Blogging Heads. And I am talking to Joan McCarter of Daily Coast, correct?
Correct.
Now, last time I talked to you, we were just talking about this. It was 4 years ago, and you had just finished hosting a panel discussion at the Left Roots Yearly Coast
Right.
between the candidates, between Obama, Clinton, and Edwards at the time. That was a pretty big moment for you guys.
It was a huge moment for us. We had everybody. Well, except for Biden. Biden was on book tour, so he didn't come. But we even had Mike Gravel and Dennis Kucinich. It was a full house.
And as I remember, you did a wonderful job hosting that event.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It was tremendous fun. I think we had a very substantive discussion, and we had a good time.
Good. Well, it's 4 years later, and we are in the midst of a Republican primary. We just had a whole bunch of results yesterday. But as we were chatting a little bit before we got on the call here, none of it really mattered.
None of it really matters in terms of delegates.
Right. No, I was, the RNC actually sent out an advisory on Monday. So this is even the day before the primaries on Tuesday. And they were like, here's the official delegate count. And just so everyone knows, just to be clear, absolutely nothing is at stake tomorrow. And so I was following up on that email official delegate count. And I started looking around at all the different delegate counts. The AP has one, National Journal has one, New York Times has one. And they're all over the map on how they're assigning these delegate counts. So if you look at the official RNC one, Mitt Romney has 73 delegates so far, and Rick Santorum only has 3. Newt Gingrich has 29.
Right. And I've seen Romney given as many as something like 120.
Right. Well,
so
yeah.
That's
today after. Right. I believe the AP had him at 101 before yesterday's results. But the funny thing is, when you try to break down how they're assigning all these delegates to Romney, it's on completely different and random bases. Like, I believe the AP has him getting, for example, let's take Iowa, because as much attention is paid to Iowa, it was just as non-binding as any of the contests yesterday. Right? None of the actual delegates have been assigned. So when you look at like the New York Times delegate tracker, it assigned 13 delegates to Santorum, since he, quote unquote, won, and 12 to Mitt Romney, and then I think it's 28-12, so I think it's like 3 to Ron Paul for some reason. But that's completely arbitrary. Like the AP has it 6 for Romney, 6 for Santorum, and the rest undecided. Like all these different delegate trackers, except for the RNC's official one, are pretty much just making stuff up.
Which is very strange. You think they'd just be going with the RNC's official count.
Right. I mean, when it comes to the official, who had just got 1,444 delegates, to do it, that's not going to be determined by what the AP says or what the New York Times says.
No.
That's going to be determined by the RNC rules. So, I mean, the only thing I can think of is that all these media organizations are desperate for people to pay attention to stuff. And that's why they have these delegate counts, and they can say that, Santorum had a big win yesterday and went from, 20 delegates up to, 70 or whatever. But in reality, if you go to the RNC webpage and you look at the official delegate counts, he went from a grand total of 3 delegates on Monday to 3 delegates on Wednesday, meaning he won nothing.
He won nothing in terms of delegates, but if you want to talk about momentum, if you want to talk about Romney's pride being hurt potentially, I don't know that you could say that yesterday was entirely meaningless.
No, definitely not. Definitely not entirely meaningless. Although I do think it says a lot more about Romney than it does Santorum. I mean, this is a race where we had Herman Cain beating Mitt Romney nationally.
Right.
Before Bachmann and Gingrich and Cain and Perry and the rest of them. So I think, the fact that Rick Santorum is the current conservative flavor of the month has less to say about what he's been doing and what he is than just the...
Well, right.
I don't know. How do you want to say it? Just the complete lack of excitement felt by
he's the
anyone
next
from Mitt
non-Romney. and the not Romney seems to be what's gonna drive folks to the caucuses and drive folks to the primaries. It's very strange to me that the guy who everybody is touted as the most electable is having a hard time garnering grassroots support.
Right. I mean, you don't get a lot of natural experiments in politics, but Tuesday was pretty close. I mean, how often is it that you get all the campaigns to agree not to invest any television advertising, any get out the vote effort, and just basically sit on the sidelines and let the candidates themselves and their popularity among the grassroots dictate the results?
Right.
Which is pretty much what happened Tuesday, right? I mean,
right.
I
well,
think
and
Romney,
you take Missouri, where everybody presumably going to that primary knew that it was just a beauty contest, knew that it would not be binding, knew that it wasn't going to do anything, and yet they all turned out anyway. It was not really high turnout, but still.
I think that's a big issue is that a lot of them didn't show, and I think the fact that they were beauty contests played into that.
Yeah.
I mean, this year there were 0 delegates at stake in Colorado. Last year there were 2.
Right.
At least 2 that are for grabs. Missouri was actually binding last year. This year was a complete beauty contest.
Right.
So I mean, if you're a hardworking guy or girl, woman, conservative, and you're weighing whether or not you want to spend half an hour getting to the polls to vote,
or 3 hours caucusing.
Right, and at the end of the day, it doesn't even matter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm gonna go ahead and guess that's gonna affect turnout.
So you're going to argue that that's what affected turnout in 2012 as opposed to 2008 more than lack of enthusiasm for the candidates?
No, I'm gonna say it's both. I'm gonna say it's both. I mean, like I said, I think the fact that none of the candidates, really competed. Mitt Romney ran one radio ad in Colorado, and that was it. I mean, contrast that with Florida or South Carolina or Iowa, where him and his super PAC were just dumping millions of dollars into television ads. I mean, the contrast between that and one radio spot is pretty big.
Yeah.
So no, I'm not going to be. I'm the last person to deny that there's a humongous lack of enthusiasm for Romney and among conservatives. But I think when you look at the rest of the turnout numbers and the results, it shows kind of this would what the race would look like. If Romney didn't have the money advantage that he did, if Romney had to compete just on his wit and wiles alone, Tuesday is what the race would look like.
Yeah. Santorum with no money at all. Santorum bragging today about the fact that he raised $200,000 yesterday.
I know, and he said, I read a blog post somewhere, I forget where, maybe it was a tweet that he was traveling to Texas today. That he blocked out 5 hours for fundraising, which is pretty typical, especially after a big day like this. But I doubt that there's going to be a lot of money pouring in. It's not like he's a surprise candidate that all of a sudden the conservative movement just found out about him,
right? And
people are being introduced to him, and all of a sudden he's going to raise a ton of money.
Right.
He's not. He's a known quantity. People in the conservative have known for a while. Everyone thinks of him as a kind of a big conservative replay of Bush. And the excitement for Santorum is just not there either.
Yeah.
But all this, I guess, is a good way to transition to the big event in Washington, D.C. this weekend, if you're conservative, which is CPAC, Conservative Political Action Conference. And every candidate but Ron Paul is slated to speak on Friday. And
interesting.
So,
was Ron Paul not invited?
Oh, no.
Ron
Of course Ron
choose
Paul's
not
invited.
to come?
He's invited every year.
Okay.
Well, that is interesting. Ron Paul is not speaking, but Rand Paul is. This is Rand Paul's maiden voyage at CPAC.
Okay.
And so I do think you'll see kind of a passing of the torch. As Ron Paul has admitted himself, he never has pictured himself in the White House. Obviously his run was more to keep his issues alive, keep the libertarian movement alive, move the Republican Party more towards a libertarian direction.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
not really
I think,
working out for him.
Well, we can maybe talk about that a little bit, but I think when you look at Rand Paul and the fact that Rand Paul is speaking, but Ron Paul's not, I think that torch is beginning to be passed already.
Hmm. Interesting. I'm sort of curious about the rest of the lineup at CPAC, and
Fire away.
particularly VDare. What's the guy's name?
VDare. I'm not familiar with him.
Peter. I have it written down. Brinslow, who heads up this organization website called VDare. That's a white nationalist site. This is kind of new for CPAC, isn't it? Going to the real fringe.
I've never heard of him.
Never had.
There's a whole mess.
Yeah, he's speaking
have you ever been to
tomorrow
CPAC?
before Mitch McConnell.
Have you ever been to see it? They have a huge, ballroom floor where they have a whole bunch of booths.
Right.
Washington Examiner, we have a booth. So I remember I had a big conversation with Charles Johnson about this last year over the John Birch Society having their own booth.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not familiar with the organization, but I will say that CPAC generally is pretty liberal with who they take money from.
Well, this is more than just a booth. He's actually speaking. He's got a speaking slot before Mitch McConnell, and then is doing a panel on multiculturalism and the damage that it's done to American society. So that could be an interesting one to catch if you're going to be heading to CPAC.
I am. I'll probably be in the main ballroom catching all of the senators, congressmen, and candidates. Most of the candidates are speaking Friday.
Mm-hmm.
But Paul Ryan will be giving a keynote speech, and I'll definitely try to catch that as well as the other candidate speeches.
So tell me what you think CPAC's going to be like this year with what happened yesterday with Santorum, with the lack of enthusiasm for Romney. What do you think is going to be the general zeitgeist there?
I think it's going to be pretty on edge. It's going to be pretty. I don't think quite despondent, but definitely uneasy. There's going to be. I've been amazed the last couple of years how much it has been taken over by more libertarian Ron Paul people. Lots of in the Fed, out of the Fed people, gold standard people, his types. But also and then there's always a fair amount of people who have their candidates. Way back in 2007, you had Mitt Romney just flooding the place with his supporters, and he won the straw poll. And generally, every candidate has a good, strong showing. But I don't think you're going to see that this year. Rick Santorum doesn't really have the organization to pull that off. Newt Gingrich is extremely unpopular among conservative activists, especially in D.C. I don't think you're going to see a large contingent for Newt either. I don't think Romney is going to play this crowd. This is not really his crowd to begin with. So, I think all of the candidates are going to make an effort to make a big splash, but I don't know if anyone's going to carry it off. I think Santorum is the biggest possible upside here to really capitalize on his wins on Tuesday and to show that he really connects with the conservative audience at CPAC. But other than that, I don't see how it could really help anyone else.
Does CPAC draw congressional candidates as well?
Not for main speaking slots. I mean, anyone who wants to, raise money in the conservative movement is going to be around there, kind of passing their cards around, etc. But I don't think there's a lot of focus on down ballot races.
Okay.
You're going to have, like I said, Paul Ryan's going to be giving a keynote address. DeMint's going to be speaking. You already mentioned McConnell. I believe Toomey is speaking too. But I can't think of any candidates down ballot off the top of my head. Only office holders.
How are panels organized for it?
I'm
trying to sort of get a sense because, I'm obviously Netroots Nation is what I'm most used to, and I've been involved in how we put panels together for that and stuff, and I'm just sort of curious how it's done.
No, I don't know. I mean, I know, I actually called up accidentally the 2011 schedule, thinking of the 2012 schedule, and I was fooled for a good 15, 20 minutes. just because the two schedules are so similar. So I think they just do a lot of the same stuff year to year to year,
Yeah.
and go with what works. I'm sure it's
Interesting.
pretty much the same for you.
Um, we do a huge push at the beginning of every year to get panel suggestions in from the whole Netroots community, and then lucky people like me get to sift through them all and figure out which ones we think would be most productive. So it's maybe pulling from a larger pool of
Gotcha.
ideas and of people. Interesting.
So, switching over to Congress, you've been following this payroll tax fight pretty closely for Daily Kos there?
Here we go again. Yeah, I had thought that after December and just the debacle that was, and just how awful everybody looked coming out of that one, but particularly House Republicans, that there might be a little less energy for making it another big political fight this time around. And I was wrong. It looks like they're just as stalemated now as they were back in December over pretty much the same issues.
Right. I mean, for me, I kind of saw this disaster coming way back in. I've been writing about it since November.
Yeah.
That the conservatives just don't have a position on this. I mean, it's not even like they are standing for principle on something. They are, but they just don't have a consensus position.
Well, it appears to be the one principle that they can all agree on is that they don't want Obama to have a win. And within that framework, it seems like the goalposts move a lot. Today I wrote about the Medicare doc fix, which Democrats had come up with a solution for that it seemed Republicans would be okay with. John Kyle was okay with it. Phil Gingrey, who heads the Doctors Caucus for the Republicans on the House side, had said, yeah, let's go with this. And generally, the Doctors Caucus gets to decide on these sorts of Medicare and physician provider kinds of issues. No go, apparently, with the caucus. So even while
right.
they have
Well, I think
the Medicare doctors, providers, hospital association, AARP, everybody in a froth over the fact that there could be a 27.4 cut to Medicare reimbursements at the end of the month, they're going to block it. They're going to block this fix. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think they're kind of different issues because the doc fix is something where conservatives are more united on doing it. They just don't want to pay for it, which is also the same thing with the payroll tax, right? But with the payroll tax, it's even worse because at least with the Medicare doc fix, you have unity among conservatives about we need to get this done. The only problem is how we pay for it.
Right.
With the tax cut, it's even worse because there's a lot of people that have just a principled belief that the payroll tax cut, a temporary one, is just a sugar high and will do no good to the economy, and therefore is just adding to the deficit. They basically kind of even view it as spending, and this is prevalent. This is good conservatives like Jim DeMint on the Senate side, not Paul Ryan, but other kind of more study committee types like. I'm forgetting the wrestler from Ohio that heads up the Republican Study Committee. But anyways, he's definitely more in the camp of, this is just a spending like tax cut that since it's temporary is like a sugar high, won't do anything to help the economy. So there's actually some principled resistance against even doing it, in the first place. And then that doesn't even get to the pay-fors, which of course is very contentious between Republicans themselves, let alone Democrats.
What's some of the contention within Republicans on the pay-fors? I mean, my sense is that they've generally been okay with the idea of means testing for some Medicare, extending the public employees' pay freeze, taking what they can out of Affordable Care Act funding. What are the areas of contention for them on pay-fors?
No, you're right. The pay-fors they're more kind of united against, are united with, like you mentioned, means testing, Medicare, going ahead with the federal worker pay freeze. There is some resistance to that. on the federal worker pay freeze. They think that's kind of gimmicky because it's a pay freeze of, I think it's like 5-10 years to pay for, again, just another year's worth of cuts. So they feel that any of the pay fors should only last as long as the temporary tax cut. So there's some of those issues, but most of the resistance on the House side, or House and Senate side among conservatives, is more on just whether or not they should be doing this at all.
The payroll tax cut.
The payroll tax cut.
Right.
I of course think they've been playing it wrong from the beginning. That they should have seen Obama's temporary tax cut, and flipped it and said let's make it permanent. I think when you look at the AMT, this is something that gets done every year, gets fixed every year.
Right.
If we establish the precedent that this payroll tax cut gets done every year, we should just sell it. Make it permanent. Let's give working Americans a permanent tax cut.
I think you'd have a lot of pushback from Democrats on that one. Hopefully, you'd have pushback from Democrats on that one.
Absolutely. But again, that would be a bonus if you're trying to sell it to conservatives.
Right, on the conservative side, yeah. And
right. Obama opposing it would be a bonus for United Conservatives.
From my perspective, I think what Democrats should have been pushing was reinstating the making work pay tax credit. That I think actually was probably more effective and didn't have the problem of calling Social Security's future into question. Even though this
and that's another bonus that I think conservatives can totally leave it on the sidelines.
Right.
Is that every one of these extensions really just undermines the entire Social Security trust fund myth. It shows that Social Security is already in the red, has been since 2010, and will be as far as the eye can see. It operates at a deficit.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. You could also say that Social Security is fine to pay out until 2037 full benefits, and then would have to start reducing the number of benefits. Social Security is not broke. Social Security is not going broke. But I think in terms of perception and what you're talking about, that this payroll tax cut does weaken the perception of Social Security and strengthen the argument of the so-called Social Security reformers for making massive structural changes to the program. So that's my problem with payroll tax cut primarily, is that it undercuts the idea of Social Security and leaves a wedge open there for a tax.
Right. It just allows, articles every year that is just, factually true that Social Security as a system by itself is running a deficit and pays out more money than it takes in, which is different than it has been every year before that. And so, we can argue about whether or not there are real assets in the trust fund anyways.
Actually, back in the 1980s, they knew that this was going to be the case when the baby boomers started retiring. So they adjusted for that. So this is not a new shock to the system. This is not something that we hadn't prepared for.
Well, except for the fact
and the other thing that's frustrating is we're not talking about the proactive fixes that could be there, like lifting the payroll tax cap.
Right, except for the fact that the existing temporary tax cut moves that date up, right?
Right.
It drains.
And that is the problem. And then that's why I am not at all excited by the payroll tax cut as stimulus. But we've got to have something as stimulus, I think. And I am concerned that millions of middle-class working families losing that $1,000 a year, $1,200 a year out of their paychecks will hurt a nascent recovery, a teeny tiny trying to get on its feet recovery.
So what do you think will be the end result here?
I would not be surprised at all to see another 2-month extension.
Really? You think they'll go temporary?
I would not be at all surprised that they kick the can down the road again a little bit.
Would they pay for the temp? Because the last one that they did between December and now, the temporary one, they at least paid for it. Do you think they'd temporarily pay for it again?
I think so.
Okay. I'll take the other side. I say they will extend it for the full year and not pay for it.
Really?
Yeah.
How did they achieve not paying for it?
What do you mean?
Do
How do we always achieve net pay?
Well, yes. But no, you have.
Like this is the first time we haven't paid for something.
I think you've got more faith in Democratic negotiators than I do not to cave in on something.
Well, that's just it. Who's the constituency for paying for it?
Right.
There is none, right?
Right.
Which is why we have the trillion-dollar deficits that we do.
And I do have to interject here that, nobody ever had to pay for the tax cuts to millionaires. The Bush tax cuts to people making $250,000 and above, that certainly wasn't paid for. So, yeah, it does kind of rankle me that even Democrats, our president, all the way down the line through Congress, talk about having to pay for this middle-class tax cut. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I mean, you talk to some of these conservatives on the Hill, and they're saying, oh, we need to pay for this tax, blah blah blah, and you can just see the Bush argument around the corner. Like, well, if that's your position now, how are you going to argue, come November, December, that the Bush tax cuts don't have to be paid for?
Right.
I mean, I think you're going to see a ton of the same clips of C-SPAN of conservatives on the Senate and House floor talking about how we have to pay for this tax cut. Played again, come December when the Bush tax cut is settled.
I think you're right.
Okay, so sounds like I have you on board for a free tax cut.
A free tax cut.
Free. Not paid
it'll
for.
be
How about
interesting to see that how that works out, and also what they do on unemployment insurance and how badly they decide to punish people who are unemployed.
Well, speaking of punishment, let's talk about the foreclosure settlement that refuses to get done.
Refuses to get done, and I think for good reason. From my perspective, it'd be interesting to hear what you have to say about that.
Sure. Well, just to catch everyone up, we have the New York Attorney General who, I believe yesterday, was supposed to have a press conference that everyone thought was going to announce that he was endorsing a settlement between his state, a whole bunch of other states, and the big banks over fraudulent robo-signing, over fraudulent foreclosures.
Right.
And then I think like 15 minutes before it was supposed to happen.
10 or 15 minutes. Yeah.
He called it off, and no one's talking. No one knows why. The underlying issues here are that the New York Attorney General, was it Schneiderman, right?
Eric Schneiderman.
Schneiderman, as well as most good progressives, don't want him to give away any liability. Don't want him to forego any prosecutions for the people who did the robo-signing.
Right.
So I guess my first question to you is, why is this issue so important to progressives? I was talking to Talking Point Memos, Edmund McMorris Santoro after the State of the Union, and he was talking about how this announcement of this investigation and putting Schneiderman in charge was one of the, if not the biggest parts of the State of the Union for progressives, that this was big news, right. Which kind of came as a shock to me. I mean, I always thought, if there's wrongdoing, we should do it, but why is this such an important issue for the progressive movement?
One of the issues is that it's so important to the economy that, and the scope of what was done to the economy by the banks, that this whole housing bubble really was the housing bubble was what brought us here. This is and the malfeasance by the banks and the knowing malfeasance by the banks, and that it's still going on, that we still have foreclosure fraud happening.
Well, see, I guess that's what I don't understand is this fraud is about the fraudulent foreclosures, right? Which I don't see how that helps anyone who is still underwater on their mortgage, or how that really punishes anyone who
larger settlement. I mean, I think a lot of the AGs are pushing for much larger settlements that could force the banks into a position of having to do write-downs or having to take this seriously. And, also this is perhaps where we're just a little bit vengeful as progressives in actually wanting some accountability for what's happened. The rumor is, or the speculation is, that one of the reasons why Schneiderman didn't choose to endorse the settlement yesterday is because there was a lot of pushback from the banks against his suit. That one of the conditions for the banks is that Schneiderman's suit would have to be dropped for them to want to sign on. So that could be keeping Schneiderman out, and I think is probably keeping Schneiderman out. Bo Biden as well. Looks like he's not going to sign on for the same issue because of the liability concerns. Martha Coakley in Massachusetts, probably Nevada, California, and maybe even Florida.
That's the game here is threatening the banks with prosecutions on I mean, not completely unrelated, but somewhat unrelated charges to get them to do a whole bunch of principal write-downs.
Part of it.
Part of it.
Part of it is accountability.
But, I mean,
part of it is deterrence, is hoping that some prosecutions would actually make this not happen again. And
that's the part that I'm kind of, I guess I'll say bothered by, is that the fraud we're talking about here, while bad, isn't the fraud that got us into this mess, right? I mean, the fraud that got us into this mess was a completely different fraud, where you had mortgage brokers growing around inducing people to lie about their incomes.
Right, but it's it wasn't just mortgage brokers doing it. There were banks doing it too. And banks selling mortgages that they didn't necessarily have. It was more than just the mortgage brokers that brought this on.
I'm not so sure about that. I mean, from my understanding, you could let's take Countrywide for example, right?
Right.
Here you have Countrywide, so they have they basically send out offer sheets to a bunch of different brokers, and they say here are the type of people we want you to bring in, right?
Right.
And it's the brokers who go out and do the dirty work. I guess I'm just. I don't get me wrong. I would love to see Angelo Mazzillo behind bars.
Yeah.
I'm just.
But where would Countrywide's responsibility be for accepting those loans?
Well, hopefully it would be financial. It would be not only financial, but on the civil side. I just don't. I just don't see how you can prove that the Countrywide higher ups
didn't know what they were doing. That Countrywide didn't know they were making a lot of really bad loans, and then securitizing them and making money off of them.
I will grant you that they did know they were making a lot of bad loans, and that they did know they were making a lot of money off them. And the worst part is they did know the federal government would bail them out if everything went to high heaven anyways.
Right.
But I don't. There's none of that is criminal. The criminal part is the fraud part that was shut off to the mortgage brokers. And as bad as what they did
not just the mortgage brokers, but with the current bout of robo-signing through the MERS system, which essentially the banks set up themselves in order to basically make this process easier.
Right, and it's not just the banks. Did you catch that Gretchen Morgeson article from I think it was Sunday in the New York Times?
No, I missed it.
It
was Fannie, right?
Right. There was this guy in I forget where he's from originally, but he had a vacation home in Texas, where it was a family home, and a bank tried to foreclose, or it wasn't even that. He tried to sell it, and the bank tried to jam him on a whole bunch of fees that he didn't think he had to pay. So he fought the bank and decided not to pay it. So then they tried to foreclose on him, and he fought it all the way. And basically, he discovered way back in 2003 that this whole MERS system was built on fraudulent robo-signing.
Right.
And not only did he bring it to the attention of pretty much everybody, including Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae then actually had internal investigators. Actually, they weren't internal investigators. They hired a Washington law firm to do an investigation to see if what this guy was saying was right. And the Washington law firm came back and said, yeah, no, he's right on the law. What the law firms that Fannie Mae is hiring are doing is fraud.
Right.
So you have this internal report from like 2003 showing that Fannie Mae knew what was going on was illegal.
Yeah.
And they did nothing.
Yep.
So I mean, what do we put? The Fannie Mae CEO behind bars?
Well, if we're going to put Bank of America CEO behind bars, yeah, I think we have to.
Okay.
Again, it comes down to accountability for me, and essentially the rule of law.
Right. See, I'm for the rule of law, which is why I think that we should keep it to the mortgage brokers and the people that actually knowingly committed fraud, as opposed to the people who just kind of winked at it. Which is bad, which is very bad.
Well, at the
but again,
very least,
I don't think it's because we're really angry and we ourselves compounded the sin by bailing these banksters out. I don't think it supports the rule of law to then say, oh, okay, we'll make it better by augmenting our criminal penalties and just making stuff up and making new crimes up just so we can feel better and punish these other people. I think that undermines.
We're not making up fraud.
Well, we're extending the criminal reach of fraud, right? We're saying it's not just these mortgage brokers that knowingly commit these frauds. We're going to also extend that to everyone who just kind of winked at it, all the way up to the CEO of Fannie Mae.
I have less of a problem with that than you, obviously. at the very least, And
you know what? You know what? I bet a lot of Americans would agree with you.
Yeah, we're a vengeful lot. Excuse me.
No, it's funny. I wrote a column after the State of the Union where I talked about the title of the column was Obama's Revenge on Knives, and
we have to break.
Oh, you okay?
Oh, I'm fighting off a cold.
You sound like my son.
Oh, sorry about this.
No problem. My son's fighting off a similar cough that just goes really rough on him like that.
My throat got dry from talking so much.
Do you have some water you can sip, or we're at 35, 36. We can call it a day if you wanna.
I think we might have. Yeah, we might have to here.
Okay.
Let me try a little bit more.
Okay. Well, we'll just go ahead and end it there, and thanks so much, Joe.